Hi everyone, I'm Sophie. Welcome to today's National Teen Book Club broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm here with my co-host Savitri and we'll be live for around 45 minutes today. We'll start with an introduction to our guest speaker and then we'll move on to our Q&A. So joining us today is young adult author Kayvion Lewis. Kayvion is based in Louisiana and has been working with books since she was 16. Her book Thieves Gambit was released around the world in over 20 languages with film rights bought by Lionsgate. Very exciting. The sequel Heist Royale is out now too. It's an action-packed read and Kayvion is a thrill seeker herself, breaking out of escape rooms and occasionally jumping out of airplanes in her spare time. This is the second of 6 sessions, which are inspired by our hero read for the term, That Selfsame Metal by Brittany N. Williams, and its curriculum link, William Shakespeare, who even features as a character in Brittany's book. That's because Brittany's book is set in Shakespeare's London, within which the area around theatres were popular for thieves, and the main characters in Kayvion's books are thieves as well. So there's an interesting link there, even though the settings and circumstances are very different. We'll be discussing the common themes, though, such as enemies, complex families, power and betrayal, as well as Kayvion's career in our Q&A. And you can start submitting your questions for Kayvion now. Either scan the QR code on screen, type the code on screen into slido.com, or type your questions directly into the Q&A function underneath this stream that you're watching. So, welcome, Kayvion.
Hello, good morning, everybody. It's morning where I am, or I think afternoon for all of you. So good day to everybody.
No, we're at 2:00, so probably just post lunch for most of us. Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. So we're going to start by asking you, can you tell us a bit more about your book, please?
Yes. So Thieves Gambit and Heist Royale, it's a duology. Thieves Gambit, the first one, is about 9 teenage thieves from 9 different countries who are all invited to compete in an international underground thieving competition. So it's basically this big international game that takes the characters around the world where they're competing in different heist-related phases, and there's lots of backstabbing and forbidden romance and people who are friends that become enemies and enemies that become friends. It's basically the whole round-the-world adventure that I've been dreaming about having since I was like 9 years old. And once I realized that I probably wasn't going to get swept into some grand international adventure, at least no time soon, I just decided to write my own. And I guess it resonated with somebody because somebody decided to publish it in lots of different languages and countries, actually. And that's the first one. And then the second one is kind of because of reasons. If you read the first book, I don't want to spoil anything. My main character, Ross, ends up in another heist international thieving game, and there's even more drama and even more betrayal and backstabbing in that one.
Sounds great, thank you. And we've mentioned the thieves link to Shakespearean London, which perhaps is a bit tenuous, but you know, these sessions are about promoting books that our young people might like. So that's why we wanted to invite you to these sessions. What inspired you, to write this story? We heard that it came to you in a dream, is that correct?
That is correct. And I know that's like the most cliche answer that I feel like you could give when somebody's like, how did you come up with this book or movie or creative thing? Oh, it came to me in a dream. And if I wasn't me, I would totally be like, okay, well, that sounds fake. But I am me, and that is actually what happened. I can't believe it's almost been about 5 years. I wrote Thieves Gambit in 2020. But I just had this dream one morning, and it wasn't even like a normal dream. It was like a disembodied voice was kind of just telling me the premise of the book while I was asleep. It was like a competition of thieves, and they go around the world, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know who that was speaking to me while I was asleep, but I woke up and I was convinced that I was just reciting a synopsis that I'd read online, and I was thinking of some other book that had been written. So I spent that entire morning like Googling like thieving competition, not fantasy thief book, and nobody had written the book that I was thinking of. So I got to write it, and it really has become the book of my heart. Like I said, I've wanted to go on adventures my entire life, and this is like the biggest adventure over the top thing that I could come up with, like out of my soul. And so part of it was like the dream, but then, or that was the premise. But then the rest of the actual content of the book was basically like the adventures that I've been imagining having my entire life.
I love that. I'm now thinking the dream I had last night would not make a good book. You just absolutely you've done well there. This is a conversation Sophie and I have had, right? Sophie thinks this is no offense to anyone, we're allowed to disagree. Sophie thinks this is a tenuous link. I think it makes perfect sense. I think that the theatre, the world of the theatre back in Shakespeare's day, pre-TV, everybody, obviously, pre-Twitter, like was radical and dangerous and exciting. And, you know, books can be like that, obviously. But obviously sitting in a classroom reading Shakespeare as a text, it loses a lot of that danger and sort of subversive, that means sort of challenging the status quo type stuff. So that's where I think there is this real link that, you know, yeah, actors were considered genuinely quite dangerous people full of dangerous ideas, like the characters in your book. So we know that that kind of anti-hero thing can be a really attractive thing to lean into. But I'm also quite interested, you were talking to us just before the call, you really love libraries. They're great to help you concentrate, but you also want to jump out of planes. I'm sure there's plenty of people on this call who are thinking, you know, the stereotype of a book lover is, I mean, hello, everybody, probably me, right? I'm sitting inside quietly with a book. How do you mesh those two things? You've written this really adventurous book. Yeah, tell us about those sort of two directions that you're sort of straddling here.
Well, I think those two things, although they maybe being a wannabe international adventurer who occasionally jumps out of planes, and I also practice kung fu and I compete in tournaments, and then also being I guess a rather introverted girl who spends her mornings going to the library to write books. They're very different things, but they're not necessarily it's not like they can't coexist. And at least for me, I find that one kind of leads into the other. Like, I love reading wild, adventurous books, and I love especially writing them. And then so having that side of myself that's, oh, it's a little bit dangerous and a little wants to go be Black Indiana Jones, that really leads into my work. And so it kind of like feeds into, and it's like this big circle of me going and having these adventures. And then I write a book about it. And then the book pays for the next adventure. And so they're maybe far away from each other, but they're not disconnected, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And how did you find the process of writing your second book? Did you find it was any different to how you wrote the first one? Was there anything you adapted or changed?
It was a very different process from writing the first book. In the publishing industry, you have a term that's called like the sophomore slump, where, well, I think that's like a general term for like the creative industry, where, you know, you have a really great experience working on your first project and it's amazing and it's like a breeze. And then you get to like the second project, especially if it's a sequel like Heist Royale is, and you find that it's a little bit more, well, not a little bit, I'll say a lot more difficult than it was the first time around. Part of that is definitely having to do with, you know, the first book is already out, or is going to be coming out soon, as it was when I was writing Heist Royale. And so you have to deal with the fact that, oh, you're going to have readers and people who are like actually expecting something and have things that they want to see delivered. And when I was writing the first book, Thieves Gambit, it was just, I didn't have a literary agent. I didn't have a publishing deal. It was just me sitting on my dad's couch, just kind of writing for fun. So Thieves Gambit was a book that I wrote without expectations. And then Heist Royale had like a bunch of expectations that came along with it. And so I think that naturally led to me feeling a bit more pressured and maybe overthinking things a lot more than I needed to when I was writing Heist Royale. I completely rewrote the book. I remember I spent like a whole year writing the sequel. I was like, well, I'm done with the first book, so let me get right on top of it. And I'm going to write Heist Royale, and it's going to be the best thing ever. And it took me a year, even though the first book took like a month and a half to write. But I had just gotten my like publishing deal, and so I was doing a lot of like behind the scenes stuff. And so it took me a lot longer to write Heist Royale. And I remember finishing it like in January of 2023, and I was like, okay, that's done. It's done. It's awesome. It's amazing. And I remember hitting send to send it to my literary agent, and then 10 minutes later, I had like a huge breakdown where I was like, oh my God, I think that was the worst thing that I've ever written. What is this? And then I remember rereading the manuscript, and it was like my eyes suddenly opened, and I just decided, after a year of loving it, and within those 10 minutes, I realized that I hated it. And this was a horrible book, and it was not the sequel that I needed. So I like frantically, I probably looked a bit unhinged. I'm frantically emailing my agent, and I'm like, actually, don't read that. Delete it. It's not the sequel. I'm going to rewrite it. And so I completely rewrote the book from scratch, with the exception of the middle heist, which is a casino heist. And I'm really glad that I did that, because the second version that I wrote was definitely a much more coherent and true to the original books. It was definitely a much better book. But all that to say, I was dealing with a lot more pressure writing the second book, and that may have blinded my judgment while working on that first draft. That was very unhinged. I kind of went in a completely different direction, and where I started writing a sci-fi book. And you shouldn't write a contemporary book and then suddenly decide you're writing a sci-fi book. and then just expect people to be okay with that jump. And I'm glad that I realized it within that weird 10-minute span that I couldn't do that.
I bet you wish you'd had the thought slightly earlier as well in the process.
Yeah, I wish at some point during that year I thought, maybe this is a different direction than I should be going for this sequel.
Ooh, how long did the rewrite take?
It was a lot faster. It still was not as fast as Thieves Gambit, which I said was a month and a half.
Yeah.
The rewrite for Heist Royale was maybe 4 or 5 months, which is less time than a year, but more time than my normal first draft or even second draft rewriting time.
Okay, it's not so long for your agent to wait. I'm sure there will be people on the call who want tips on securing an agent and getting published, and I don't think we've delved into that as deep yet, but I'm going to prioritize this question from St. John Bosco Arts College. Thank you for sending this in. They want to know what book or books, probably it was many, did you read as a teen?
Yes, I remember coming out when, well, not coming out. I remember I was a teenager when a lot of YA dystopian books were coming out, and I remember that was like the big craze. That was like the thing when I was in high school around like 2012 to like 2017-ish. And I was not a huge fan of dystopian books. And so I remember like walking into like bookstores and libraries and being like, why is literally every book, I just assumed like, are the only teenage books like dystopian books? I really don't understand like why that is. And so I think I did a lot of reading under my age demographic at the time and then over my age demographic. But one book that I remember that was a YA book that I loved a lot as a teenager was The Selection, which is technically a dystopian book, but I love that series by Kiera Cass. I don't know if it's still popular or if people nowadays are still like discovering it, teenagers, but it's about, it's basically like The Bachelor meets The Hunger Games, in which 35 girls are picked to go compete in this competition. You can see that I still like the competition team trope, to basically see who's going to become the next princess of their kingdom. And I loved that series so much. Meeting Kiera Cass is still on my author bucket list. I think she's kind of under the radar as an author, but one day I would love to meet her. Another book that I really liked was, well, the 39 Clues series as a whole. I started it in like elementary school and middle school, but I was still reading them as a teenager because, as I said, I was looking for, I feel like the books that I write now were the books that I wanted to read as a teenager, and I just didn't see as many like adventure books, or especially adventure books like about Black or biracial girls around when I was a teenager. So I'm kind of writing to fill the gap for books that I was looking for that I couldn't quite find at that age.
And whilst we're talking about books that you have read, what was your experience of reading Shakespeare?
So Shakespeare is definitely still a staple of the high school curriculum in the United States. As I was looking through the questions that you guys sent over about like books that inspired you in like high school and books that you read, I was wondering like a lot of like what is the overlap between like the curriculum between the United States and in Great Britain. But we do read Shakespeare in America, I swear. Hamlet was one that I remember really liking that we read in, I think, 12th grade. And I think one of the reasons I really enjoyed it was because it was also the play that my high school's theater was doing the same year that we happened to be reading Hamlet. So it was like, oh, I'm reading it and the language is a little difficult to understand at first, but then we would go and we watched the actual like play done by like the theater group. And I was like, oh, I can see like their emotions and them describing like and acting out like what they're saying. And I was like, oh, I feel like I really like get the story now. And then I thought that I was the first person to like make this deduction, but apparently it was like common knowledge. But I remember leaving the theater with some of my friends after we'd seen Hamlet and we'd been reading it in our English class. And I stopped my friends and I'm like, y'all, I think the Lion King ripped off Hamlet. Do you guys not see like the similarities? And apparently everybody already knew that there was like based off Hamlet, at least like loosely. And I thought that I was like coming up with something that nobody had witnessed before, but I don't know why that's my most distinct memory of Hamlet in high school, me thinking that I'm the one that connected it to the Lion King.
Don't knock yourself, because I mean, my parents are both English teachers, and I mean, in fairness, The Lion King came out, I was quite young, but I didn't realize it until many years later. And more embarrassingly, I didn't realize what To Be or Not to Be is talking about. It goes back to the sort of high stakes nature of Shakespeare, right? To be or not to be. He's questioning whether he should be alive or not. You know, there's these elements in this.
Had you not seen the whole him holding the skull moment? Well, I guess if you weren't.
I just thought he was chatting to the skull. If I'm honest, everybody, just to reassure you, I just thought it was just sort of a prop who's having a conversation. It didn't occur to me. Just a big chunk of text. So some of it is about how it's taught, and some of it's about how you resonate with it at the time.
If you don't interpret it as being about him possibly dying, is that really what it means? Is it about your interpretation or the author's intention?
No, exactly. And I genuinely think I must have assumed he was just filling in some time until the next fight scene. That is just, again, to reassure anybody who is. I would love to know about your journey to being published. So you've written a book, you're really proud of it, and now you're, as we've said, and we'll come back to this, I'm sure, it's going to be made into a film, and you've got a series. So let's just, before we get into all that, which is really exciting, how did you get onto that path?
This is going to sound ridiculous as me getting my ideas for books from dreams, but I kind of started writing as like an inside joke between my best friend and I. So I was working at a library it was 2018. Gosh, I can't believe that was like 7 years ago. And I'm just like a la-di-da-di-da 19-year-old working at a library. I made friends with a girl who would become my best friend, and we were both working on the same floor at this library. And I used to tell her that one day I'm going to disappear and I'm going to go on around the world adventures and you're never going to see me again. And one day she started saying back, well, how are you going to pay for that? Because we make like $9 an hour. And I started saying back to that, well, I'm going to write over the top adventure novels that are actually about my real life adventures and nobody will know. And then those books that I write will fund my real life adventures. And that was just a joke that we had for months. And then one day I was off work and I was just dawdling around at home and I opened up Google Docs, and for some reason I was like, wouldn't it be funny if I could make this joke a reality? And then I started writing my first book then, which was an adventure book. And from the first page of writing, I'd never written anything before outside of school. I fell in love with writing. I was like, oh my God, I know that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And so I wrote that book, and then I wrote 10 more books. Thieves Gambit is the 10th book that I wrote within the span of I think 3 years, because I was just so into writing, and I'd never tried it before, but I knew as soon as I started that this is what I wanted to do. And somehow I actually did make that joke come true. And every time I see my best friend now, I'm like, hey, remember that time I told you I was going to be an author as a joke? She was like, I don't think it's a joke anymore. And now I guess it's my life.
That's so cool. And I guess obviously working in a library did kind of shape your career path, even just having that joke with the friends that you met there. What advice do you have for young people who are considering working in a library, and perhaps how they should navigate that, or whether that's a job for them? Do you have any kind of advice or kind of insights that you could share around that as a career?
Yes, I loved working in the library. I worked in 3 different libraries, 2 children's libraries as a children's librarian, and then one in a special collections department, which was the cool place where we had 100-year-old magazines and old maps of the city. And I felt like I felt a little bit like Indiana Jones working there as well. I would say if you have a local library around you, go spend time there. If you're interested in seeing if you would like to work in the library, feel the vibes. Libraries are generally pretty calm and collected place, so it's a perfect place to work if you're an introvert. Although if you're a friendly or an extrovert type person, there are opportunities to have a more public-facing role. At least here in the United States, a lot of the work that libraries do is providing what we call programs for people, like story times with kids, or teaching people skills like people who are older and may not be as familiar with how to use computers or the new sort of technology. There are whole programs that you get to be the person connecting with people in your community and teaching them skills that they didn't have before. And it's also just a fun place to be around books all the time. You get to see books that are the new books that are coming in, and you get to scan the shelves and see, okay, well, how long has this book been here? This book's been here for 15 years. How popular is it? How many times has it been checked out? So if you're just curious about the longevity of certain types of books, and the different editions that come in and everything, it's a really interesting and fun job if you're just curious about that sort of thing. But for the most part, I would say just go and explore your library, see if you like your local library and your librarians, and then maybe one day, if you really like it, just slide up to the reference desk and be like, are you guys hiring? What's the minimum age that you start hiring? I started working at my first library at 16, so definitely, at least if it's similar over there as it is in the United States, could be a cool after-school job. Definitely better than, I don't know, working at a grocery store or something. Although that is very fun, I'm sure, in some ways, but if you are a book person who maybe wants to be doing something like that.
Yeah, you're right. I did actually myself work in a pharmacy when I was younger, and I think I don't know why it didn't occur to me to work in a library. You're right. My friend does it now on weekends, and she gets to read to the young children and, you know, listen in on any activities that are happening in the library, and it is a really lovely job. So I'm going to ask, as I mentioned it a little bit before, it must be really exciting knowing your book Thieves Gambit is going to be turned into a film. And I would imagine, hopefully, if it does well, the next one as well. So how did that happen? And how did you feel when you got the news?
Oh, that was such, I feel like my situation with the whole movie film thing was very different than the typical experience. For most authors, like you sign a publishing deal and then like a year and a half, your book comes out. And then after the book comes out, if it's popular, then a film company will choose to what they call option it, which means they're buying the right to maybe make the movie in the future. So there's two parts of a film deal. There's the option part, and then there's the production, like the actual production fee, which means, okay, we've decided we're actually going to make the movie and we're going to sign all the paperwork and do all of that. We ended up weirdly like skipping a lot of the middle part, which is very bizarre and also very confusing for me, who had no idea how any of this works. So imagine me, I'm going on submission, which is the process of like trying to just sell just the book to a publisher in like April of like, it was 2022, it was like 3 years ago. And we are lucky enough that we have a lot of interest from publishers like pretty fast. And I'm dealing with all of this, which is all very new. And then after I'm talking to an editor, trying to work on all the book stuff and get all that straight, one day, my literary agent just happens to say on a call casually, oh, by the way, I sent your manuscript to these film agents in Hollywood, and they read it over the weekend, and they want to represent you, and they want to start sending it to big Hollywood people today. Is that cool with you? And she just said it as like a little aside, and I was like, sure, I guess, because I really had no idea what was going on. And so I talked to these like Hollywood film agents, and they kind of tell me everything and nothing at the same time within the span of 15 minutes. And so I'm so overwhelmed with like all the book stuff that I'm just kind of like, okay, sure. And my literary agent assures me like this stuff usually takes like a really long time with like the film stuff. So just don't even worry about that. I definitely should have worried about that because within a week, we were also, it was so bizarre and strange, but apparently Thieves Gambit was really resonating with a lot of people on the Hollywood side as well. And we ended up having within a week about like 10 producers who were interested in like maybe buying the rights. And we ended up with a total of 18. And I knew that everything that was going on, but I kind of didn't know everything that was going on at the same time because my priority, of course, was finding like the best publisher for Thieves Gambit. And so I kind of was just getting emails occasionally like, oh, so-and-so at this Hollywood studio read your book and is maybe interested. And I was kind of like scanning the emails and then putting them aside because I was too overwhelmed by all of it. So I spent like 2 months focusing on like just finding a publisher for Thieves Gambit. And then I had to actually buckle down and like talk to all of these different like producers who were interested in buying the rights for the movie side. And all of that happened to correspond or like coincide with the time that I was going on vacation, a vacation that I'd planned like a year ago and couldn't really reschedule. And so I ended up talking to a bunch of film producers while I was in Dubai, halfway across the world, and also had terrible food poisoning. And so I had to like get up at like 3 a.m. because they were on like Hollywood time and I'm on Dubai time. And I also just vomited. And I'm like, hello, Hollywood person. I'm glad that you like my book. Excuse me for one moment. Blah. And then come back. And then just, this probably sounds like it was just so crazy and I don't even really know what was going on. But that's kind of because I didn't really know what was going on. And I feel like I was in some kind of like sick days. But the long story short, we ended up going with Lionsgate, who I definitely made a really good, conscious, healthy decision and was not just in some kind of fever dream state when all of that was going on. They were just a really good team. They're partnered with a producer called Temple Hill, who are the producers that do a lot of YA adaptations. They did the Twilight adaptation, the Hate You Give adaptation, Love, Simon. And I felt like they were a really good group to have like a YA adaptation in the hands of. And so that was my primary reason for going with them. But I guess too long didn't read answer to your question is there was a lot going on at one time and I kind of don't really know what happened, but this is how we just ended up here.
I love that you've just shown like the glamorous side and the not so glamorous side of your life as an author. In terms of your film and, you know, when that will come out in future, would you be adapting the story at all for film? Is it completely out of your control with the rights being signed off? Like, how does that process work? And how do you feel about that if you don't have that kind of control over the adaptation?
That was definitely something that I discussed a lot with the different parties that were interested, is like how much input would they expect of me, like as an author. And I tried to be like, when I was asking, to say it in a way that didn't lend itself towards I'm really interested in being involved or I'm really not interested in being involved, because I was interested in what people's answers would be if it didn't seem like I was leaning either way. I am technically an executive producer, and so that would imply that I have a lot of like say in like the script and everything. But personally, I once I had settled with my team, I made it clear that I'm less interested in being like getting into like the nitty gritty of like the details and everything. That's why I thought it was important to pick a team that I felt like understood the soul and like the heart of my book. And if I left it in their hands, that they would just make a great adaptation. They do give you the option, or you should pick a team if you're interested in that, that will give you the option to be really involved, like if you want to be. But me personally, my passion is my books. It's like the written word and publishing. And so I'm more interested in working on my next great like novel rather than, okay, we have to make sure the exact shade of Ross's eyes is accurate on film and everything. But it can go either way. And if you ever find yourself in a situation, make sure that you know what you want going in so you can be clear about telling people like, no, I want to be really, really involved, or no, I want to take a step back and please don't bother me with small things.
I'm interested, you said about the eyes color. So I was going to ask, and I am going to ask, because it might be helpful to people on the call who haven't yet read the book to have another way of insight into the book. Do you have an idea of your dream casting?
I don't personally, but I just let my friends kind of decide for me, and I transfer over their thoughts. So my brother, he wants Haley Berry. I think I always want to say like Halle Berry, but I know her name is like not the same as the other Halle Berry. But the new Black Little Mermaid, he was like, oh, she should totally be your Ross Quest. And another one of my friends said Sydney Sweeney should totally be my Noelia, who is kind of like the villain slash ex best friend character. And so whenever they have comments like that, I kind of write them down and I'm like, oh yes, this is great. I'll definitely send this to my film team and act like it was my idea. But I don't have any like honestly, I think I would prefer to see some really talented like new actors and actresses like portray the characters. I think that would be a really cool thing. But more than anything, I would love if we could have like a cast, if it was possible, that the characters were actually from the same countries as the characters in Thieves Gambit. So all the characters, the main competitors in the Gambit, are from 9 different countries, like Japan, South Korea, and Australia, the Bahamas. And it would be cool to find actors who are actually from those places of origin, if possible. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. That sounds great. It's such an exciting time for you. And one thing we loved about your books is the pacing of them. They're so fast paced, and I'm not surprised that they've been picked up for film rights, given that they have such a cinematic feel to them and they're so gripping. So how do you go about writing the kind of pacing of your story? How do you maintain and approach that kind of energy?
People ask that a lot, and I feel like a lot of authors would say, oh, I use like the save the cat formula, or I use some kind of beat sheet that makes sure I'm hitting a specific point. I really despise beat sheets personally, because I feel like, at least for me, some people do them and utilize them really well. But for me, whenever I try to use like a predetermined, like, here's what should happen now, and then I end up with some things that feel really formulaic. So my only rule for myself is if I'm bored writing it, people will be extra bored reading it. So I try not to get like, if I'm like a page into writing something and I'm like, this, like either it's like a character moment that's not holding my attention, or it's like an action scene that's not holding my attention, then I'm doing something wrong and I need to like go back at least like 5 pages and like figure out like where something went wrong. I do think that I have like a sort of innate sense for kind of like paciness, if that makes sense. I don't really like to sit still, metaphorically, when it comes to my writing. So there is usually something happening pretty frequently. So yeah, I guess basically I just have a rule that's like, okay, something interesting should be happening, whether like on a character level or a plot level, like every few pages. But I don't specifically have like a list of, okay, well now it's this type of like paciness. And now we're going to have an intense character conversation, and now an action set piece. It's all just very innate, and I try to keep myself entertained while I'm writing.
Good start. I think I would expect, yeah. If you're not enjoying it, then maybe nobody else will. So obviously our hero read is a fantasy historical fiction, and yours is more of a thriller. So you've got sort of a slightly interlinked. Is that what you would read for pleasure? And if not, what do you read for pleasure? Maybe we've got some recommendations for our young people on the call.
Yeah, I feel like the things that I read for pleasure are very different from what I write. And a lot of that probably is because it's hard for me to it's hard for me to read what they would call comp reads to my book. So when people in the publishing world are talking about your book, a lot they'll talk about comp reads, which are basically like if you were on like an Amazon page for a book, it would be the books that are at the bottom that says readers who read this also enjoyed this. And a lot of it is me like comparing like, oh, well, if I'm reading a book that's very similar to mine, like another like sort of contemporary thriller or competition book, I'll be reading it and like half of me is like really enjoying it and really loving it. And then the other half of me is like, this book is so much better than mine. It's going to sell 1 billion copies and everyone's going to forget about my book. And a lot of that is probably stuff that I should work on. So all that to say, I end up reading a lot of things that are outside of genres that I write. So I do read a lot of fantasy lately, and especially a lot of sci-fi. I'm currently reading Dead Space is the first book. I'm reading the second book called, hold on, I wrote it down because I knew I was going to forget the title because I keep getting the titles mixed up. Dead Station by S.A. Barnes. She writes like these weird, these super like immersive horror books that are set like in the future in outer space. So the first book in the series is about kind of like a haunted Titanic ghost ship, but like it's a spaceship in outer space, and maybe there's ghosts on the ships, or is it just some sci-fi shenanigans? We don't know. You have to read the book. And the second book is about a group of explorers who are on a abandoned alien planet, and they start seeing hallucinations and super scary stuff. But is it another sci-fi thing, or is it actual ghosts? And that's sort of like outside. Sci-fi is obviously very outside of the genre that I write, and so that's probably why it's a little distant from my work life, and so easier for me to read and not get like totally engulfed to thinking about my own publishing world. But I'm also reading currently Immortal by Sue Lynn Barnes. Not Sue Lynn Tan. Okay, Barnes is the other author, by Sue Lynn Tan. Her first series was Daughter of the Moon Goddess, which was, it's kind of like a Chinese fantasy series, a sort of similar in the same vein of Mulan, but a lot more immersive and with like actual Chinese mythology. And this Immortal is sort of like a different characters, so it's like a spin-off in the same universe. And I just started that. I'm only like a chapter in, but that's amazing as well. So yeah, sci-fi and fantasy are a lot of what I read in my personal life, because they don't let me think about my work life of publishing thriller books.
Thank you for those recommendations. And I just wanted to bring it back to your book and our hero read as well. So the main characters in both are fighting for survival and fighting for their families as well. What did you want the reader to experience or take away from your books? Was there a reason why you wanted to explore kind of survival as a theme, or competition as well? You spoke about that being a trope that you are interested in.
I do love competition books, I think, for the sense that competition books and books that are like mystery puzzle type books, they kind of give you as the reader the chance to experience a little bit of like an adrenaline, like heart poundingness for yourself. And if you're anything like me and you maybe are like a wannabe adventurer one day, maybe you'll read these books and then it'll give you some insight of like, oh, what are the sort of things and the goals that I want to have like in my life? Like I hope people who read my books and see the different locations maybe are inspired to go to some of the locations as the characters in the book, or maybe to do something a little bit more adventurous or dangerous. Well, not dangerous, but maybe exciting, that they wouldn't have thought that they would want to do in their life. But more than anything, I think Thieves Gambit is also a book about like found family and a girl who's been isolated for a lot of her life, finally finding her people and her friends. And so I think I would want any young readers especially to know that it's never too late to find your crew and the people who are special to you. And whether you're just a random school kid in Great Britain or you're an international teen thief, there's people out there that are meant for you.
That's a great point. And just a reminder to everyone that is on the call, we're coming into the last sort of 5 minutes. If you've got a burning question, last chance to slip it in under the radar. We have one, which is there a book or story that has really impacted you or meant something to you? I guess even like one that you wish you'd written, maybe. But yeah, so a book that's meant a lot to you.
I think I mentioned it earlier on the call, but the 39 Clues series, I have come to realize has been so impactful in forming not just like my books and works, because it's like an around the world adventure series about kids, you know, solving these like mysteries and these 39 clues to find this big, huge treasure. But also, I've realized that it's formed a lot of like who I am as a person. I think I really didn't realize that I had this sort of adventurous and like really wanderlusty side of myself until I read those books as a kid. And so they've definitely like inspired me, Kayvion Lewis, the person, and then also like Kayvion Lewis, the author. And I want to write books that make me feel the way that those books made me feel growing up.
Thank you. Why do you love being a storyteller? What do you love most about your job or the industry as a whole?
I love it's like you get to create worlds and you get to create like whole different timelines and lifetimes that you might not have ever gotten to experience. It's like you get to make your being a storyteller, an author, making your wildest dreams, or in my case, I guess literal dreams, sort of come true in a sense, and creating stories and lifetimes and timelines that are gonna like outlive you. Like if I went missing on some grand adventure tomorrow, these stories that and these words and these worlds that I've created would still be out there. And it's almost like I don't know. I don't have any kids, but I feel like being an author is almost like having a kid with each book in which you've created something that's like going to stand on its own and it's got its own legacy and its own destiny. And so I don't know. That's why I like writing books. I feel like I'm creating something like bigger than myself that's going to outlast me. And they really can be anything that you want, like creating whole worlds that it's just whatever you want it to be. And that's really cool. It's really cool to create something, which is probably the most basic way that I could say that. But it's just cool to create stuff. And it's really cool to create stuff and be able to do it for a living. And I'm very grateful for that.
Oh, it's really inspiring, and it's great. You know, you're obviously having such a great time doing something you love and being able to fund yourself doing other things that you love. So would love to know, do you have any advice for young people, or maybe your younger self, something you wish you'd know, but any advice for young people around achievements or success? So to sum up, what tips do you have for creating a career success story?
One of my managers at the last library that I worked at, she was actually my manager at the library I worked at before that. So she'd been my boss for like 5 years. Her name was Renee, and she was kind of like almost like a second work mom to me. She was like, I love Renee so much. She's amazing. But she had told me once during like a meeting, she was like, Kayvion, no matter what, you need to remember your why. And I was like, did you read this in one of your how to be a boss manuals? What does that mean? She was like, no, you need to remember why you're doing something, like that's because remembering your why will like help you get through the tough times. If you know, like I know that I'm writing because like I said, I love creating stories, and then I love being able to like create something that's going to leave like a mark of its own like behind me. And so as I've gone on in my career, I feel like what she said has started to kind of make more sense. Like even if you're not writing books, if you're going to be a doctor or a dentist or you're going to do anything, you need to know, if you know why you're doing it and it's a good reason why, whenever you hit the hard times or the times that you like want to quit, you just sit and you remember, okay, why am I doing this? Okay, that's why I'm doing this. And then I don't know, you get like a anime style power up and you like chug on through, and it's so much easier. I don't know, just a basic sentence, but that's what I would say. Remember why you're doing this. And then if it's a good reason why, it'll always help you get through the hard times.
That's a great point. I'm sure we've all had that moment. We've reminded ourselves of that just in general, not just at work, actually. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much, Kayvion, for taking the time to speak to us so early over there where you are. And yeah, we've covered so many interesting things, such a different perspective as well, with quite an emphasis on the film side, which is really exciting, and we'll definitely all keep an eye out for it, I'm sure.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for listening to me ramble as I try to, wake myself up as I talk to you guys.
And thank you to people who sent in questions. They've been great. So we hope you enjoyed this Q&A with Kayvion, and it was great to hear from you with your questions. We will be sharing a feedback form soon via email. We really appreciate both students and school staff completing it. You can also share any questions or comments in the Q&A function before you leave today. We always love to hear your thoughts and feedback. We hope you can join us for more. Our upcoming sessions for that self-same metal are all on screen now. Please head to our NTBC webpage for more information and to register any new groups. You can also find more broadcasts on the Speakers for Schools website on a range of different topics. Thanks everybody for joining the call. Thanks again, Kayvion, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye everyone. Thank you.